Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the weekly MMA Cycles Market Update. This is Gianni DePoce, your host, and it is wonderful, as always, to be with you all on this lovely Friday afternoon. We are joined this week by Dr. Copper, mon cher collègue et ami, my dear friend and colleague, Matthieu Kaiser from Paris. Matthieu, welcome. How are you doing today?
Hello, Gianni. Fine. Thank you for having me on your show today.
Good. We're really glad to have you. We're going to do a little interview and have you tell us a little bit about your background, and then we're going to review the markets like we always do. But before I do, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I have been working in the finance industry for 20 years as a journalist, as an economist, and lastly as a portfolio manager. In parallel, yes, for a longer time, actually, I have been into astrology. I have been a true astrologer for 7 years, but actually I was into astrology since I was a kid. And I was very happy when Merriman started this program because it's really an opportunity for me to make all these paths converge, and this is really fascinating.
Indeed, and Matthieu is one of our top students in the Merriman Market Timing Academy. He's done some excellent research on copper, so we nicknamed him Dr. Copper, as you can imagine. So he's done some really good geocosmic correlations and discoveries on those. So before I ask him questions on his work and his thoughts on what's going on in the world and markets, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and just review what's going on. Let's start off by looking at the Dow Jones. The Dow rallied to a new cycle high coming off of that low from June 17th. So we're down a little bit now, giving back some of the gains here on this Friday afternoon in the United States. But overall, a pretty constructive week. And we could be coming out of some pretty significant cyclical lows in stocks. So it's good to see stocks rebound a little bit here, but we have some pretty intense geocosmic signatures coming up in the next few weeks. But this past week, we did see Venus ingress into the sign of Cancer, and that was a pretty good boon for stocks. We also had a trine between the Sun and Neptune. This both happened on July 17th, and I think the trine aspect between the Sun and Neptune gave people a little bit more confidence in the direction of stocks, as well as perhaps some notions that inflation could be cooling off in the short term. Again, emphasis there is the short term. We also had an opposition between the Sun and Pluto the same day that Mercury ingressed into the sign of Leo. That was on July 19th. And then today we start Leo season. So we're beginning the second third of summer. Peak summer season begins now. And we're seeing some leadership exhibited from the NASDAQ on a percentage basis. That is a pretty good signal, but frequent viewers will note that as long as Saturn is in the sign of Aquarius, we have to be a little cautious in the long end with respect to the tech trade. Now there are some signs that there is a surplus in semiconductors and chips, so that could actually turn into a headwind for prices. When you have too much supply, that might not be that good. So that's what we're seeing across the NASDAQ, but overall a pretty constructive week. We are in a pretty intense geocosmic zone, as I mentioned, so we have to be on alert for reversals, especially in stocks and currencies next week when we have Venus squaring Jupiter on Monday, the 25th of July. And then next week, we have some very key data points and another key geocosmic signature, especially Jupiter going retrograde on the 28th. That is the same day that the Q2 GDP numbers are set to be released in the United States. That's going to be on the same day as well as a new moon. And the day before, the Fed is supposed to raise interest rates. So with Jupiter going retrograde, I do want to take a look at crude oil here, because crude oil has been trading in a range-bound manner, and the planets that we love to look at when it comes to crude oil are Jupiter and Neptune. And so we've been range bound, but with Jupiter going retrograde and having a square aspect with Neptune, we have to be on alert for a potential reversal or big move in the energy market. So definitely something we want to keep an eye on going into the next week. I also want to take a quick look at grains, because grains have been taking it on the chin, so to speak, dropping down significantly in prices. But on the other end, we're starting to see some strength emerge in the livestock trade. So again, Venus rules grains and livestock as well. So, these geocosmics or these planets may rule certain markets, but they could impact them differently based on the various trends in effect in the financial marketplace. And I also want to take a quick look at gold, because gold put in a new multi-month low on Thursday, but then rallied up to close nicely higher on the day. So that is a pretty important reversal that we may have seen, something that we talked about with Ray a couple weeks back. One of the downside price objectives was fulfilled on this latest decline. Want to take a quick look at Bitcoin, and then I'm going to save copper and currencies for the discussion with Matthieu. We're going to get to that in just a moment. Bitcoin consolidating its gains over the past couple days, so that is generally constructive. However, we know with the approaching square aspect between Venus and Jupiter, need to be on alert for potential reversals. But if they hold their gains, that could turn into a good sign. So I would encourage you to check out our daily MMA crypto reports if you want more insight on what's going on in the cryptocurrency market. So Matthieu, before we get into copper, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what's on your radar in terms of upcoming geocosmics, whether that could impact, geopolitics or markets, any geocosmics on your radar, any markets or countries that you're watching closely right now?
Well, in terms of geocosmics, as you said, we are really in a much crowded time band, and I think that next weekend will be really hot, could be really hot, because we have this conjunction of Mars, Uranus, the North Moon node, which will be in square with Saturn, and at the same time with the Moon and Mercury, which means that the Moon and Mercury will probably trigger this whole set. And this is a really tense set, and it will be shortly after Jupiter retrograde. It will be also shortly before Mercury triggers the moon eclipse that we had in May. This is something that I like looking at, because I think this is quite significant in some markets, and especially here, because we have this concentration over the weekend. So I think that next week will be really interesting, namely in US stocks, because we are in full earnings seasons. Yeah. We had this rebound since mid-June, but this is quite a sluggish rebound. The breadth of the market is quite low. So I think this is, we have to be cautious with that. The other markets I have on my view are copper, of course, and the euro, because there are a lot of things going on in Europe currently. And I think that after this summer, we have this square between Saturn and Uranus coming on in September. And we will have a lot of planets changing directions in October. And we have an overlap between the oil market and the copper market for the primary bottom which are due. And I think, if I want to sum it up, that recession fears will probably peak during the autumn. This is not, we are not done with that. And I don't know what you think of it, but as you follow closely the oil market, but I think that it will be a bellwether for the recession fears, and as we are expecting a primary bottom between mid-August and mid-September, I think that recession fears will be intense by this time.
Well, we're seeing those recession fears creep up across, several different metrics, and not to get too technical today, but we do have, a yield curve inversion, meaning that interest rates on longer term bonds are lower than interest rates on shorter term bonds. That's usually a recessionary signal after a prolonged period of time. It's not an immediate signal, but it means that one is coming. But as I look at this copper chart, copper is a very key industrial metal. And it's a base metal, so it's used in a lot of industrial inputs. And this collapse that we saw in the last couple months is, usually something you see coming into a recession. Now, the other driver of inflation expectations is crude oil. Crude oil is holding up well, but could it turn into a case where copper leads and crude oil follows? I think that's a big question that you briefly touched on. But Matthieu, going into next week, you mentioned it. We have a lot of really key markets that are going to be impacted, especially with the square between Venus and Jupiter, because Venus rules copper as well. And we'll look at the euro next. But you also mentioned the conjunction between Mars, Uranus in the North Node in the sign of Taurus. Geopolitically, I think that really is centering on Ukraine because Mars, war, Uranus, surprises, Taurus, grains. Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe. So I think that is something that we have to keep a close eye on. So could you speak to that a little bit, since you're in Europe and a little bit closer to the front lines over there?
Well, the thing is that actually the war between Russia and Ukraine is being more or less won by Russia at the time being. They are making a lot of progress in terms of territories, and they put a lot of pressure on Ukraine. This week we had developments in Ukraine which are really interesting. That Zelensky fired a lot of staff in the security and intelligence services because he was afraid of betrayals. And to me, he looks more and more isolated. This week also, Mercury refused him to talk during the meeting. And this is the picture is more and more blurred for Zelensky and for Europe as a whole as well, because we had this we had Boris Johnson stepping down. This week we had Draghi from Italy stepping down, and they were really key figures for the support of Europe towards Ukraine. So I think there is a lot going on the scene and backstage currently in Europe, and this is key. And as I'm totally agree with you, the signature of next weekend will be key also, and will be I think really significant for Europe.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to make any doom and gloom predictions, but with Uranus involved with Mars, Uranus rules uranium, so I really hope that we don't see any nuclear weapons used over there. That would be a really unfortunate event. But you also did mention something else too that I want to touch on. I do have a chart of the euro up, so we can talk about that. But you mentioned that when we get later into the fall, we're going to have a period where there are a lot of planets in retrograde. I think it's over 6 planets at one point are going to be retrograde. So that's usually a very intense time period and something that Matthieu mentioned was on his radar. So definitely want to be, it seems like we're moving into an apex or a peak of a cycle of some sort, or even a trough of an important cycle of some sort this fall. So Matthieu, I have a chart up with the euro. You mentioned Mario Draghi. Mario Draghi, Prime Minister of Italy, used to be the head of the ECB. He stepped down. Well, I saw there was some disputes with him and the Italian president, but that's beside the case. The euro fell to par last week, rebounded a little bit this week. Any comments or thoughts on what do you think is happening in the euro as it pertains to Geocosmics? I know you touched on them a little bit, but anything else that is on your horizon?
Well, this is quite, it looks quite strange, but actually the euro may have found a trough here. We were expecting a 22-month low, and we may have met it this week, which is a bit strange because developments are really, not positive for the euro.
It's like buy the rumor, sell the news.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. Yeah. I think we may be heading for a technical rebound, and for a short rally in the first phase of this new intermediate term cycle. And most likely this next intermediate term cycle will be bearish. So we will have a counter trend rally and then a corrective rally, you could say, and then heading back towards south for the euro, because currently on fundamental terms and in political terms, I think we are facing a lot of headwinds in Europe, energy-wise, institution-wise, and politically, country-wise, we could say. Just a brief word on Italy. You know, this is the main market for debt in euros, labeled in euros.
Yeah.
So this is really a big deal, and the ECB is a bit trapped with it because they are intending to set up a program of a bond buying program to limit the disintegration of the euro, to limit spread widening within the euro area. And the problem is, what will be the criteria for this bond buying program? And with what is happening currently in Italy, the question is really topical.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And this past week, you know, the ECB seemingly signaled a little bit of panic. They raised interest rates by 0.5 basis point, bringing them back to zero. So they're finally back at zero. But Matthieu, we could continue this conversation, but we are running out of time. I want to thank you again for taking the time out of your day to join us. Really enjoyed this discussion. I do want to point our readers and our viewers to www.mmacycles.com. This upcoming Monday, we will have our MMA monthly addendum report sent out, and I would always encourage you to sign up for our free weekly column written by Ray. It's a great complement to these weekly YouTube videos. So thanks again for watching, Matthieu. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much,
we will definitely have you back in the future. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot. That's good.
All right.